welcome back, guys, to the TheSpurgeonPiper. This is Wilson with you. Now, I'm a big podcast fan, and I have, 15 to 20 I keep usually on hand to listen to when I'm driving around and making pastoral visits or working out or whatever I have time to do, to have some listening going on. And one I started picking up last year that I was really excited to get on was the Pactum. And I really started digging into it, listening to past videos or recordings. And sure enough, I was happy to have on, after asking, I was happy to have on one of the main originators or the founders of the podcast, the hosts, and that is Pat Abendroth. So Pat, thank you for jumping on today.
Sure, Wilson, it's a privilege. Pardon me if I call you Spurgeon or something, or Piper or something like that, but I think it would be, a compliment if I call you Spurgeon.
Of course it would be. Oh, absolutely. It would be for Spurgeon. Yeah. No, that'd be excellent. Now, Pat, we have you on, of course, for really the name of your podcast.
Sure.
Pactum.
Yep.
But before jumping into that, why don't you give us a little bit of background of yourself?
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Wilson. And I do want I've watched a couple episodes of your show, and I felt included, even though I'm not a pipe smoker. So
excellent.
Thank you for being missional in your.
Yeah, you bet. I'm glad to hear that. To hear that.
I thought that was kind of intriguing. And I also want you to know, while you might think lesser of me because I don't smoke a pipe, I don't smoke tobacco, I do have here as a decoration in my office, I do have a hookah pipe.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, they're just like the Apostle Paul enjoyed. So yeah.
They said I bought it in Jerusalem, and the joke is it's the one thing that unites the Middle East is hookah.
Well, hey, there you go. Yeah, I guess there's some truth there.
My adult kids keep wanting me to smoke from it, but I haven't smoked from it yet. It just kind of looks cool in my office.
It does. Yeah, looks pretty nice.
Anyhow, so I'm in Omaha, Nebraska, born and raised. Been here pastoring since 1998 at Omaha Bible Church, and love the church. Great congregation, great team, pastoral team. Married since 91 to my wife, Molly. We met in modern fiction class, and I like to say it's been modern fiction ever since. 5 kids, 3 out of the house, 2 teenage boys, just super busy with their hobbies, basketball. They race mountain bikes. Sounds kind of funny in Omaha, Nebraska, but you got to ride a bike. You got to be in shape. So
you bet.
We have more bikes in my garage than I even literally know. So,
well, I saw some pictures recently you guys posted, or you posted, I guess on Instagram.
Yeah.
And I didn't know there was some of that terrain in Nebraska. So it's a
good time. Yeah. We have mountains like you have in Texas, right?
Yeah, there you go. There we go.
Okay. So anyway, we do the podcast for fun, kind of as I thought it was going to be easy, but it's a labor of love. It's a good ministry. It's growing a lot.
Yeah.
We have a lot of listeners and gotten to know people like you. Working on a book project for the Pactum coming out pretty soon. Target audience is, it should be good. Same kind of target audience.
Awesome.
We want to go deep, but in a way that anybody and everybody can understand.
Yeah.
So even with men like you, I think you might not learn anything. You might know all the content, but hopefully it helps give you some tools to maybe share with the congregation or friends or things like that.
Absolutely. That's awesome to hear. Awesome.
I think one of my favorite things that I've heard so far is a friend of mine who's a theologian. He was not a listener, but his wife was like the avid listener, and she loves the Pactum, and now he listens, so they have something to talk about. So,
hey, there you go.
Yeah, so it's good.
Nice
good. Trying to encourage everybody, but pastors, so it's not a threat, but it's a tool to kind of help them.
Definitely. Yeah.
So that's
absolutely.
That's what the Pactum is all about.
When did y'all start? When did the podcast begin officially?
Yeah, so we do one release about one a week, and we're I think 60 some episodes in, so just over a year.
Okay, just over a year. All right,
yep.
Awesome.
Yep, it's moving right along. It's kind of cool to see where different people listen, and
definitely
good responses overall, at least. So
anyhow. Absolutely. Well, excellent. Good stuff.
Thanks for promoting it. I really appreciate it.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I've been a big fan. I always like to have not only podcasts for my benefit, but ones I can recommend even to the congregation. And that's definitely one of them. So it's been really, really great to have. All right. So again, the Pactum is named y'all's podcast, and that's some of those Latin words. Maybe no one knows what in the world that meant. But
Right.
When I first came across this idea, this belief, this doctrine of the Pactum Salutis, I thought, this is rich, this is awesome, and I wanted to dig into it more. But so to start us off, because I know there's going to be a host of those who don't know what we're even talking about, what is the Pactum or the Pactum de Salutis? Maybe some other terms that mean the same concept or are a title for the same concept.
Yeah, you bet. So Pactum Salutis is, well, sometimes we even do shorthand. We just say Pactum, but what we mean is Pactum Salutis. And it is Latin. The only Latin I know I've learned from R.C. Sproul, I think, pastor.
Right.
And I have a good Latin dictionary, but it's good shorthand. It's a good label, and it means the covenant. Pactum means covenant, and Salutis means salvation. And so it's the covenant of salvation. The Pactum Salutis, we call it the Pactum, the covenant of salvation. And really what we're getting at is the Pactum that the triune God, the Christian God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit make to redeem sinners. And so that kind of gets us started. But Wilson, I've been a pastor long enough to know, and you no doubt know, that even lots of Christians don't know what a covenant is.
Yes.
So maybe we should start with, a covenant is a formal agreement.
Yes, glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I think that really helps people. And we probably don't need to add a lot to that because there are different kinds of covenants.
Right.
So as soon as we start elaborating and saying too much, we'll disqualify certain covenants from meeting that definition. So formal agreement, think maybe marriage. The Bible talks about marriage as a covenant. So I have not a casual relationship with my wife, Molly, but it's a formal relationship. And there are consequences if there's violation, and there are rewards if you uphold the covenant. So I think that might help.
Definitely.
I have a covenant in my neighborhood that says we can't paint our house light purple, or there will be consequences. So
there we go.
A formal agreement.
Yes. Yeah.
So if we keep, if we keep that in mind, and then we think, okay, covenant of redemption, covenant of salvation. Sometimes older writers called it the covenant of peace or the council of peace. We're talking about what God did even before time began as we know it. So like in Ephesians 1, it talks about before the foundation of the world, and you have the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit agreeing to redeem sinners. And so I think that kind of helps us to at least get to the gist of it. We're talking about this great purpose, this great plan, that redemption is going to happen, that the Father is going to elect, if you will, in Ephesians 1, the Son is going to provide the redemptive work, and the Spirit will apply it. So covenant of redemption is what we mean when we're talking about that. I've got some formal definitions too, if you'd like, but.
Yes, do so, please.
Okay. So Mike Horton has a book called The Christian Faith, and it's a big old doorstop of a thing.
Yep.
But I do like it because in the back it has a glossary, and you can look things up like this, and 9 times out of 10, he's going to give you a simple definition of a big idea. So covenant of redemption, Mike Horton says, also known as the council of peace. He said it's a covenant entered into by the persons of the Trinity in the councils, think legal, councils of eternity, with the Son mediating its benefits to the elect. This covenant is the basis for all God's purposes in nature and history, and it is the foundation and efficacy of the covenant of grace, or of salvation, in other words. So that's kind of a mouthful, but at least we can get to the gist of it.
Yes.
So sometimes authors use big words like intra-Trinitarian, because it's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They talk about the atemporal, so outside of time, because Ephesians 1 says before the foundation of the world. And so it's cool stuff. It's
Absolutely
digging into the mysteries of God, really, not in a weird like thriller psycho movie mystery, not a murder mystery, but mysterious because it's stuff that we wouldn't otherwise know if the Bible didn't talk about it.
Right.
And I think it's cool because mysteries like this cause us to worship and to be in awe and amazement that God had a plan and a purpose like this. So
very much so.
I love me some Pactum. How about you?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So we talk about this idea, and you already referenced one passage, Ephesians 1, which may be the most direct passage on it, arguably, possibly.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I would say so. Where maybe are some other places where folks can get a grasp of this, and And let me stress again, guys, Ephesians 1, just really start there. You kind of see the intra-Trinitarian work of Father, Son, Spirit involved in the plan of redemption or salvation, Pactum. But where are some other places, Pat, that we can go to kind of get an idea?
And maybe, Wilson, before we get there, since sometimes people get maybe intimidated by the label, I just want to remind everybody that we use labels. Sometimes they're not helpful, but they can be really helpful if we know what they mean. And it speeds the conversation along. We don't always have to explain everything we mean every time when we have a shorthand label. And we use labels like Trinity. And all Christians believe in the Trinity. And yet when we do a word search in the Bible, we don't find that word.
Right.
So just because we don't find it doesn't mean it's true. Sort of like the covenant of redemption or the Pactum. You won't find it in an English word search. And yet you're going to find all of the components, all of the pieces. And then all of a sudden you and I can sit down and we don't have to rehearse everything. We just say the Pactum and we say, there you go.
Yeah.
So I think that's helpful, but people who are new to the party, so to speak, even with the TheSpurgeonPiper, I'm sure if you were sitting down and we were sitting enjoying a fire together and you were enjoying a pipe and I was having an IPA, you might not use the shorthand labels if you were explaining something to me, because I would be new to the party.
Sure.
And you'd take the time to explain. But then once I'm initiated, so to speak, you could just say whatever it is you'd say.
Yeah. There you go.
So it's the same kind of thing. It's Christian theological lingo. So the Pactum Salutis, covenant of redemption. And I don't want to leave Ephesians 1 too quickly, because that really is, I agree with you, Wilson, that's the place where I can show people and prove it to them. And really where I was won over to seeing this as biblical, because before the foundation of the world, we have that kind of talk. We have the Father, the Father predestining, if you will, that uses that word in there. I know some Christians don't realize it's in the Bible, but it's in there. Elect is in there. And then you have the Son doing his redemptive work and the Spirit applying the redemptive work of the Son to the elect. And so all three members are there. There's a lot of emphasis about salvation, redemption. And since it was orchestrated or planned before time, that's why we call it atemporal, or we call it what we're getting at. So I would plant my flag there.
Yes.
And that's the great place to start.
Absolutely.
Then I think then we end up having to look at, the fingerprints or the components, and they complement Ephesians 1. Maybe they're not, I think Ephesians 1 is a slam dunk.
Yeah.
But then you start to see it in other places where you, for example, in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 5 to 10, you have the Son saying repeatedly that he's come to do your will, meaning the Father's will. He says, behold, I've come to do your will, O God. He says it again, behold, I've come to do your will. So the Son doesn't just, become incarnate and show up and by happenstance, he decides to die on a cross. No, he's fulfilling God's law, and he's going to go to the cross and do all the things that he did because it's according to a will. It's according to a plan. It's according to a purpose. There's already been an agreement. It's not coincidental or casual. It's formal, and it's going to happen.
Right.
So I think that really helps. John 17 talks about the Son obeying as well, doing some sort of work. And then maybe a little bit more technical one that doesn't need to be technical, but in Luke chapter 22, verse 29, Jesus says, I assign to you, he's talking to his disciples, I assign to you as my Father assigned to me a kingdom. And first read doesn't seem very covenantal, but the Greek word that he uses that the ESV translates assign is a covenantal kind of word. Diatithemi, you don't need to know that that's the word. Your audience doesn't, but I assign, I covenant to you. It's a covenantal word that's used in covenantal context like Hebrews 8, Hebrews 10, Acts 3. So I covenant to you as my Father covenanted to me a kingdom. So at least the reformers, when they started getting back to Greek and studying the text in the original languages and not just Latin, they started to discover more and more of these covenantal Pactum Salutis fingerprints, if you will.
Absolutely.
And so
yes.
it's exciting. It's cool to learn about, exciting to learn about. But I'd go back to Ephesians 1 for the key
indeed.
text.
Indeed.
How about you? Any texts that do you like to go to other than these, or are these kind of the go-tos?
You hit the main ones. One I'd add that we can even go back in the Old Testament, which is predicting the coming Messiah.
Yep.
I think most folks, especially who've been in church, they're aware of the servant songs, or the suffering servant found in Isaiah, starting 41 through 50 or 52.
Yeah.
And in Isaiah 42, we can go to verse 7, and it says that, or verse 6, it says, "I am the Lord, I have called you," and talking about the suffering servant. "I have called you in righteousness." And then he gives these "I will" statements, which when we find "I will" statements in the Bible, we really want to grasp those when it's the Lord speaking, because they are certainty. He says,
Good.
"I will take you by the hand and keep you, and I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison, those who sit in darkness." And actually we see this fulfillment, of course, in Christ. Luke 4:17-21, Jesus stands up in the synagogue and he reads this passage and he says, "It is fulfilled." And so there we go. We're seeing the Old Testament fulfilled, of this covenants made before time, though we see it in time being spoken of, that Christ, a Messiah, the suffering servant, would come to open the eyes of the blind, of the lost people. And so, yeah, we can even find it Old Testament for sure, and which is always awesome to make those intra-testamental connections.
Yep, absolutely. Good. I'm glad you brought that up. I love the servant theme.
Yes, indeed. Now, you mentioned reformers, and I think that's the main place usually we go for understanding this doctrine. At least I did, and those who taught it to me, it was from some of the great reformers. Where in historical theology, or we can just say church history for those who may not know what historical theology is, but the development of doctrine over the course of church history, where can we go to get an understanding of this doctrine?
Sure. Well, we would want to say that it's always been there, even if we didn't call it the Pactum.
Yeah, that's important. Yes.
And even if it wasn't formalized, it's always been there because Ephesians 1 has been there.
Right. Yes.
We do want to keep that in mind. And yet with the Protestant Reformation, again, getting back to the Bible and stressing things that Rome had been denying and rejecting, like the doctrine of assurance. I think we end up seeing the doctrine formulated, recovered, developed, because it is, and I'm getting ahead of us because I know we're going to talk about practical importance later. But when it comes to the doctrine of assurance, the reformers really dug in, that you really can know that you are accepted by God, and not just in the here and now, but because of the past, because of this covenant of redemption. It's sure that it's going to happen. And so different scholars read it differently, but even Richard Muller, the Reformed scholar, says you see at least the concept hinted at in Martin Luther, but it's more developed by the reformers as early as, early 1500s. Some guys I can't pronounce, but we see the concepts in Calvin. We see it in Caspar Livianus, 1536 to 1587.
Yes.
Hermann Witzius, 1636 to 1708. Coxaeus also, Edward Fisher, William Ames, Patrick Gillespie. The one that more of your listeners will know, or some of your viewers will know, is John Owen.
Yeah.
So he's going to come a little bit later, but John Owen is so helpful because he's in the throes of fighting even with the counter reformers. So he's really got to dig his heels in and own his stuff because they're now attacking the reformers. And so Owen's a great go-to guy, I think, when it comes to all of this. The guy whose name I can't pronounce, Wilson, maybe you can better than I can, but I'm going to butcher it here. I don't want to do this in public, but it's Johannes Acolampadius. Johannes Acolampadius.
You did just as good as I could, so congratulations.
1482 to 1531. It makes me feel like I'm speaking in tongues when I say it. So
that's a tough one.
He's the first one on my list when it comes to dates.
Definitely. One that really helped me and I usually have the 3-set volume behind me, is Francis Turretin. He's another one. He covers it in his Elinctic. I always mispronounce that name because it's horrible. I don't like that word. But Elinctic theology.
As soon as you said 3 volumes, I thought he's going to reference Turretin, and I can't wait to hear him say what it's called.
Oh, I never liked that word. I wish it was just called Institutes or something.
Right.
But yeah, that one as well.
I think Turretin is great. He's clear, that question and answer format. This we affirm, this we deny. So yeah, Turretin is a good one to go to. Literally, it's on my list of guys here. So Turretin comes shortly after Calvin, and again, also he's good because he's having to deal with the objectors.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yes, yeah. And he's dealing with and there's our arguments we probably won't get into, but there have been arguments against it, and he already kind of gets into the weeds of those arguments and helps you think through it. So
absolutely, yeah.
I appreciate him. Now one thing that when a little after coming across this understanding, and then digging more into the work of the Trinity, that I thought, okay, whoa, is there a conflict here? Is how do we square this understanding of the work of redemption between the Father, Son, and Spirit with the one divine will of the triune God? And if we want to be faithful to that Orthodox doctrine to a God who is simple in essence, and there is no division, and therefore no division of will, how do we square those two together? Because immediately I thought, whoa, this is a contradiction and that can't work.
Sure.
How do we approach that?
Yeah. So getting into the matter of divine simplicity, and sometimes people need to be reminded, we don't mean that God is easy to understand. He's not simple for us to understand.
Right.
But he himself, since he doesn't change, he's simple. He doesn't change. If he changed, he'd become better or worse.
Right.
So he's simple in theology, we say.
Yes.
And there's only one divine will, as you said. But I think that we get some help from people like John Owen, because John Owen ends up being diehard Trinitarian, fighting for it even. And at the same time, he's doing the very same thing with the doctrine of the Pactum. So he's a good guy to go to. And a contemporary guy would be someone like Matthew Barrett.
Yes.
Because he's at the tip of the spear fighting battles right now for divine simplicity.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he's a big fan of the covenant of redemption. And so I think he's just channeling his inner John Owen.
Yes.
So here's what Barrett says. He said, and this is in his book on the Trinity, which I would commend to people, even if they only wanted to learn about the Pactum, they could find the sections in there. But this is Simply Trinity by Matthew Barrett, who's in Kansas City, Missouri, as a theologian talking about these things. He says, some, however, object to the covenant of redemption. An intra-Trinitarian covenant must involve multiple wills in the Godhead. That's what they say, which violates divine simplicity. And then Barrett says, funny thing is, whenever the Reformed tradition, drawing on the great tradition, put forward the covenant of redemption, they never believed it violated the one will or essence of the triune God. So that at least gets us moving in the right direction, I think.
Yes.
He goes on to say, every work of redemption is simultaneously the single one work of the Trinity, and yet may be appropriated. That's kind of the key philosophical, theological distinction, appropriated in a way that is consistent with each person's eternal relation.
Yes.
And I've got all kinds more quotes here that are deep dive quotes that we probably don't need to do on the episode. But if your viewers want to do a deeper dive, I would commend that book, Simply Trinity.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed.
By Barrett.
Pat, would it be? I know some of the theologians, and I believe Franz Sanders, who I love to read on his work in the Trinity. I believe he's not a huge fan of this word, but would it be close to fair, close to accurate to say when we speak of the Pactum, we're talking about the economic work of the Trinity?
I like that word, and
I know some don't. It helped me in grasping it, but
sure. Yeah, I think I agree. And you know what, Wilson, I posed the same question. I can't remember who I posed it to recently. If I posed it to Barrett or John Fesco, who's a friend, or if it was David Van Drunen. I can't remember, but they basically said, yeah, I understand what you're trying to do, and that's fair, but basically cautioned me for three different reasons, and I don't remember them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I've heard in response is we get what you're saying, but there's probably better ways to formulate the understanding.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but for listeners and viewers, when we speak of sometimes we speak of God ontologically, who he is in his very essence, and then we speak of God economically as he relates to others. So I didn't understand the difference for a long time, but they are helpful categories.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, indeed.
Yep. Good.
All right. So this is one of those doctrines that when speaking, even I've had discussions on it in my congregation, and some folks either are like, hey, this is really neat, or they say this is really neat, but I don't think, how's this benefiting me? And some are just outright, look, okay, great. If that's the truth, awesome. But what is this doing for my life, for my spiritual life? So that's important. I think theology should be very beneficial in ways to our lives. It should be. Otherwise it just simply stays as head knowledge.
Agreed.
So how does this apply benefits to the average Christian?
I think maybe we need to start by remembering that we are called to love God with all of our faculties, yes, including our minds. Yes. So love God with heart, soul, mind, and strength. So it is important that we just think rightly about God.
Right.
And if we think rightly, we can love him with our minds.
Yeah.
And even if it might be a bit of a mystery, let's know that God is great in his redemptive plan. It's before the foundation of the world. It just blows your mind. And that should, that leads us to awe, to praise, to worship. If we understood all of it, then I don't think we would be very prone to worship.
No. Yeah.
So let's at least start there. This is part of knowing who God is. I've heard it said before, I forgot who said it, but the essence of idolatry, which the Bible has a lot to say about, the essence of idolatry is wrong thinking about God. And so if we don't know about the Pactum, we probably don't know something that's true about God, and it's time to learn. So let's at least start there. But then we start thinking in terms of practicality beyond that. And we've already alluded to it, Wilson, and that's the doctrine of assurance depends upon this largely, in my opinion. Salvation is not just because of something that I decided, even though it has to do with me, and we really do need to believe. But in reality, when you stop and think about it, I believe because God sovereignly worked in my life through the power of the Spirit, applying the work of the Son, according to the predetermined work of the Father. I mean, talk about mind-blowing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Assurance is there. I loved what Stephen Charnock said when he wrote about this, that I have a 2-volume set. I don't know, it comes in 1 volume, but he wrote a lot about the existence and attributes of God. And he says the consideration of this will encourage our faintness. He's talking about the Pactum. It will encourage our faintness, silence our fears, baffle our scruples, and settle a staggering faith. Is a believer in a storm? Here is an anchor to hold him. Is he sinking? Here is a bow to catch at. Is he pursued by spiritual enemies? Here is a refuge to fly to. And I love the practicality.
Yeah.
When life is hard and you're facing all kinds of suffering and difficulty and questions and maybe being persecuted and you're living in a dark time, how good it is to meditate upon the redemptive decrees of God.
Absolutely.
So
one of the hymns that we started singing in the church I pastor is a song or a hymn written by Matt Merker, Christ will hold me fast, or he will hold me fast.
Yeah.
And just some of the lyrics, though my faith may fail, Christ will hold me fast. And when even a pastor, I can struggle with assurance at times, as far as when we feel the weight of sin, it can feel heavy, and our sinful nature can tell me, or my sinful nature can tell me, how can Christ still love me?
Sure.
And what a comfort it is to know that I was given to Christ by the Father with great love. And it's not due to my faithfulness, but to his faithfulness as my federal head. And that is a wonderful comfort. So we can sing the Pactum in a sense. I mean, we sing this rich theology, and that is very applicable to the Christian life and beneficial. And
absolutely.
As you mentioned, we shouldn't have this disconnect between the intellectual scholastic work, and then there's the average Christian, which I think has happened a lot in evangelicalism, in churches broadly, and Lord willing, that slowly is not being the case anymore.
Good resurgence of Pactum theology. Yep.
There you go.
And you're doing your part. It's good.
It's wonderful work. It's wonderful work. Go ahead, please.
No, Whitzius also says, it is the foundation of the whole of our salvation. So, I mean, the foundation of being saved, of being forgiven, redeemed, resurrected, it all goes back to the purpose of God, to the decree of God. So the Pactum is super important.
Yes.
I think of another practicality is it helps me, and this is a big one, even for pastors, it helps me to read the Bible the right way.
That's a big one.
Including the Old Testament.
Yes.
It's not like the plan of redemption started in Bethlehem.
Right. Right.
Something really important happened in Bethlehem, but before Genesis 1, there's already a plan. And so we don't need to allegorize the Old Testament and find weird hidden meanings that aren't there.
Right.
But we can know that all along, everything that's happening in progressive revelation is actually happening as part of an unfolding drama of redemption.
Amen.
And that just changed my life as a pastor.
Definitely.
So to use technical terms, it changes your hermeneutics. It should change your hermeneutics.
Absolutely.
How you interpret.
Yeah, that's a big one itself. For those who are like, man, this is awesome, I want to know more, or maybe I'm so a little confused now, I want to know more, what are some materials they can go to get further help? And let me answer that just real quick once. Guys, if you go to the Pactum, all right, so you go to your favorite podcast, or just Google it. I'm sure you can find it that way too. The Pactum had the podcast. They had a episode on this. Was it the Pactum on the Pactum?
Yep, that's what we called it.
Okay, awesome. I just wanted to throw that in there because that will be helpful. Some of this we covered, but there is some other. There's more information they cover on this topic. So I just wanted to throw that out there real quick.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Easy to find us. So, and back to where we started, we called it the Pactum. It relates to what we're saying here because the Pactum includes everything.
Yes, right.
So before time begins, this is the plan, and this is the culmination of everything. So everything that happens, on God's green earth is related to that. So on the Pactum podcast, we can talk about anything.
Yes, absolutely.
Including the Pactum. So,
very much so. Very much so.
So I do see that you have on the screen there, you have your Colonel Sanders version of Berkhof's systematic theology.
Yes. Yeah. That Colonel Sanders. I love that. Yes. Which if someone's like, what, I really want to fix systematic, he covers the covenant of redemption or the Pactum.
He does.
Here.
Yeah.
Which I'm glad you noticed that.
A friend of mine just showed me that version and I thought that looks like KFC.
Maybe they sponsored it. We just don't know. Yeah.
I think Banner of Truth has some great stuff, but sometimes their marketing department seems puritanical.
Yeah, it's they make some interesting choices. That's for sure. That's for sure.
Okay.
I want to give a couple real quick while I'm thinking of it. Another one that may be helpful. It's not directly just on this topic solely, but a smaller title is Gerhardus Voss's Reformed Dogmatics. And he does touch on, you mentioned the Council of Peace and how this is named different things.
Sure.
Oftentimes, depending on what century or what time, where in time.
Yeah.
He calls it the Council of Peace. He does cover it as well as more into the doctrine of God altogether. And some of it's heavy, but I think it can be some of it can be very digestible for the layman. And then one other one, really recommend this one for various reasons, but does cover it. A chapter itself on it is Sam Renihan's The Mystery of Christ. I've read this multiple times. He is a great theologian and pastor in California, a Reformed Baptist as well, or particular Baptist, depending on who you're talking to.
Sure.
And he does great work there as well. So I just wanted to give those two while I'm thinking of it.
Good. I was hoping you weren't going to steal any of mine. So
good. I'm glad we didn't. Yeah.
No, we're complimenting each other. So my favorite little book to recommend to add to your list would be called Sacred Bond.
Yes.
And it's by Michael Brown and Zach Keel. They're Presbyterian, so you might get a little bit of that in there, but
right.
generally speaking, it's a great intro.
Yes.
Two students of Michael Horton, and Mike Horton wrote an intro, and it was too complex. he would admit it too. So two of his students took his ideas and made it simple. So awesome. I think everybody should read Sacred Bond. Really easy. And then John Fesco has a book that's a little bit more heavy, but it's an actual whole book called The Trinity and the Covenant of Redemption. That's a good way to go. Covers a lot more history than we talked about. Matthew Barrett's book that we referenced, Simply Trinity, talks about it at least in 10 or so pages.
Right.
And then maybe, I don't want to be Mr. Self-promoter here, Wilson, but if you're coming out of a background that thinks that any kind of covenant that's not called a covenant explicitly in the Bible is kind of the boogeyman, kind of a biblicism background, that's my background. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on this kind of stuff for people who think it's unbiblical, I guess. So anyway, you could, awesome. At omahabiblechurch.org is our church's website. And then if you just look up my bio, there's a link. It's a free PDF. So just for people who, again, if they don't see the actual words in the Bible, they aren't going to believe it's true. That's my target audience, to try to prove it that it's in the Bible.
That's great. And we'll link that below for you guys to check out as well. That'd be a great resource.
Super.
Excellent.
Super.
Well, Pat, before you go, anything else to add? Anything you want to point the listeners, the viewers to?
Oh, anything? Not really. Anything I can ever do to help. Anything we can do to help on the Pactum. You can find us on Twitter at the Pactum. You can find us on Instagram at the Pactum Theology. We also have a website called thepactum.org. Anything we can ever do to help. We're just enjoying what God is doing in the world because of people like you and the Spirit of God working in our lives to say, hey, this stuff is great and grand. Let's recover it because it's so helpful for the people of God.
That's right. Yeah. Amen. Well, Pat, thank you again for jumping on. Thank you for y'all's podcast, how beneficial that's been. And I enjoyed our conversation.
You're welcome. I did too. Thank you so much.
You bet. All right, guys. Well, until then, we'll talk to you soon.